The sun had barely cleared the ridge when they pulled her from the line. "Ma'am, step aside." The voice came flat and automatic, like it had already said the same thing 5 times that hour. No explanation, no inflection, just authority on autopilot. Rain Whitlock didn't argue. She didn't sigh, didn't ask why. She simply tightened her grip on the frayed strap of her canvas pack and stepped out of line with the kind of composure that suggested this wasn't the first time she'd been ordered around. To the others waiting along the faded concrete corridor of Gray Line Checkpoint, she looked like a woman you wouldn't remember even 5 minutes later, late 30s maybe, weather-hardened face, black hair tied into a short, efficient knot, worn hiking boots, a plain zip-up jacket, no jewelry, no phone in hand. The kind of traveler who moved quietly through places and didn't ask for anything. And in places like Gray Line, that made her the perfect target. Gray Line had a reputation, a federal military hybrid post near the edge of 3 jurisdictions, where entry screenings came with extra attitude and too much free time. Guards here didn't just enforce protocol, they performed it, turning random inspection into a show. Today, Rain was cast in the lead role. She approached the table without a word. One of the younger guards gestured vaguely at her belongings. "Bag on the surface. Unzip the mane. Hands where I can see 'em." She placed her pack down slowly, carefully, not theatrically, just exact. The way someone would if they'd packed the same gear too many times to count. Her hands stayed visible, palms relaxed, shoulders level, but her eyes moved. Not with panic, with calculation. One scan of the checkpoint layout, one glance at the angle of the nearest camera. She counted exits, counted personnel, counted weapons. The guards didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't understand. The first zipper came open. "Let's see what kind of adventurer we got here," muttered the corporal. Out came a field blanket, a compact tool roll, iodine tabs, a compass sealed in its own oil-filled housing, each item placed with the kind of precision that most civilians didn't bother with. Then the tone changed. "Hey, Sergeant, there's something sewn into the lining." The voice wasn't amused now, it was alert. Rain said nothing. The younger guard ran his hand along the side seam. "Right here, custom stitch work. You can't even see it from the outside." The sergeant stepped in, older, sharper, more cautious. He watched as the guard slid a knife blade gently under the edge and worked the hidden flap open, a soft, tearing sound. Then silence. From the compartment, the guard pulled something wrapped in a cloth square gray, worn, clearly folded and handled often. He peeled it back. A badge glinted under the overhead lights. Not polished, not ceremonial. A matte black triangle with a fractured wing, its feather tips etched in silver. At the base, a rising arc burned halfway through. No name, no number. Just the ghost of a unit once whispered about. Someone behind the inspection table exhaled sharply. "Wait, that's Ghost Company insignia," one voice murmured. "No way. That unit got wiped in 2010. The sergeant didn't speak. He just stared at the badge, his brow tightening. The name Rain Whitlock hadn't meant anything to him 5 minutes ago. But this was different. He looked at her again. And for the first time, he noticed the posture. The way she hadn't moved a muscle during the search. The way she didn't look angry or worried, just calm. Too calm. The room didn't go silent all at once. It dimmed, gradual conversations tapering, gestures slowing, radio static fading into the walls. Someone had just pulled history out of a hidden seam. And now, everyone had to decide what to do with it. No one asked about Ghost Company 7 anymore. Not because it was forgotten, because it had been made that way. The unit didn't appear in rosters. It wasn't acknowledged in military briefings. It had no veterans group, no reunion photos, no faded patches on surplus jackets. It was formed for a specific kind of war where systems failed, timelines collapsed, and no one else was coming. Ghost Co. 7 was a rapid response engineering detachment designed not to fight, but to fix under fire. They restored communications, reprogrammed field devices, extracted data from downed drone sol while bullets were still flying. Their missions didn't have names, just coordinates and silent exits. Rain Whitlock had joined when she was barely old enough to rent a car. She didn't come from a military family, no officer pipeline. Just a quiet girl from western Pennsylvania who could take apart a jam targeting array and rebuild it better than factory spec. Her reputation grew fast, not because she talked, but because she delivered. By 2007, Rain was leading technical insertions across 3 theaters. She never asked for medals. She just packed light, stayed sharp, and kept everyone's gear alive. Then came Operation Ashfall. It was supposed to be routine drop-in, restore a buried uplink station, and get out before dawn. The satellite node they were targeting sat beneath a collapsed relay array in the Cinderline Strip, just a few miles past the safe zone. They went in under a sandstorm. The weather wasn't ideal. The extraction plan was worse. They were supposed to be gone in 48 hours. They didn't make it past the first 12. A rogue artillery unit, unflagged and unclaimed, opened fire at 530. Communications dropped. Air support was late. The evac window shifted once, then again, and then silence. By the time anyone at command tried to respond, it was already too late. Every name on the manifest was declared KIA. No recovery. No remains. No further action. That's the version that made it to the record. But Rain survived. Not because of luck. Not because someone pulled her out. Because she made choices others wouldn't, couldn't. Sergeant Boone had thrown himself over the hatch when the munitions hit. She didn't waste that moment. She rerouted the uplink's power grid into a false fire, burst something that mimicked a downed aircraft signature. Enemy drones shifted 5 clicks west, chasing ghosts. And while they chased, she climbed, bleeding, deaf in one ear, 2 ribs cracked. She didn't leave with a weapon. She left with a drive. Encrypted, heat-sealed. Inside, the last 70, 2 hours of Ghost Company 7 every log, every ping, every voice. When she reached the evac team, they didn't salute her. They didn't even say her name. They locked her in a gray debrief room, asked nothing, then handed her an envelope. Inside were 2 items. A discharge form with no date, no signature, no return address. A black patch, worn, bare, embossed only with a fractured wing crossing a triangle. The broken wing variant, issued once. To her, there was no briefing, only understanding. Disappear and no one else dies for what they buried. So she vanished. For the next 13 years, Rain worked off-grid. Not hiding, just unremarkable. She fixed turbines in the Nevada desert, restored comm towers in rural Colorado, rewired communications posts in places that still smelled like war. No uniforms, no ID, no stories. She never showed the badge, never spoke the name. She stitched it into the inside of her pack not as decoration, but as a weight, a reminder. Some burdens aren't meant to be displayed. They're meant to be carried. People met her, worked beside her, thanked her, but they didn't know her. They didn't know she once rebuilt a field switchboard under active fire. Didn't know she held a perimeter alone while evac protocols failed on repeat. Didn't know she was the only survivor of a mission no one was supposed to return from. And she never told them. Because for Rain Whitlock, silence wasn't shame. It was protection for others, and maybe for herself. It wasn't supposed to happen here. Not at a checkpoint, not during a routine bag check. But one curious hand, one torn seam, and suddenly, a truth long buried surfaced, sharp as ever. The kind the system thought it had paid enough to forget. Now the silence was breaking, and nothing could put it back. The badge hadn't been acknowledged yet, not officially. It still lay on the metal table, catching dull light. No one had picked it up. No one had dared. But that didn't stop the noise from creeping back in. The younger guards, unsure what they were looking at, filled the silence with what they knew: sarcasm. "Pretty serious hardware for a hiking trip," one of them said, nudging her paracord bundle with the butt of his pen. "You planning to rappel down the gift shop?" There were chuckles. It didn't take much. Another guard held up her compact field, blade black handle, steel spine, well-maintained. He flipped it in his hand, clearly enjoying the moment. "Let me guess, survival shows? Or one of those bushcraft YouTubers? You know, how to make a snare with dental floss and all that?" He grinned like he was clever. No one corrected him. Rain stood still, shoulders relaxed, chin level. She wasn't smiling. but she wasn't flinching either. They moved on to the water purification tablets, the compass, the stripped-down med kit. What's this? Homemade apocalypse starter pack? Looks like someone's watched one too many action movies. Bet she calls herself Operator on Reddit. Each comment got a few more laughs, casual, performative, meant for an audience. The checkpoint was beginning to gather one. Travelers from the line had started to slow down, rubbernecking under the pretense of checking their bags. A few security staff from neighboring booths edged closer, pretending to clean equipment or check screens. Then the female officer arrived. Lieutenant Jenna Kelsyoung, sharp and eager to assert herself, walked into the circle like she owned the air inside it. She glanced at the badge, still sitting on the table, then at Rain, and raised an eyebrow. "This belong to you?" Rain didn't answer. Lieutenant Kells scoffed. "Right, of course not. You just carry old metal patches from ghost units in secret compartments. Totally normal." She picked up the badge with 2 fingers and inspected it, as if it might smudge her gloves. "I've seen wannabes before. People who buy gear off surplus sites, play dress-up in the woods. You can always tell by the boots. Real operators don't wear worn-out soles." More laughter. The younger guards leaned in, emboldened. "You think she made the badge herself?" "Probably laser-etched it. These cosplay types love detail." Lieutenant Kells set the badge down, harder than necessary, then crossed her arms. "You know what I think? I think you tried to enlist. Maybe flunked out of basic or never even tried. I think you've been playing some fantasy in your head for so long. You started believing it." She stepped closer. "You walk like you've seen action, but it's just mimicry, posture. Like you read about it, watched enough footage to copy it." Still, Rain said nothing. No anger, no embarrassment, just quiet. And that silence did something unsettling. Because people who fake things usually scramble to explain. People who lie start talking too much. But Rain stood there like a granite post, like she'd seen storms louder than this. That was when Sergeant Tom Edgerton, mid-50s, square jaw, a Ranger tab long since faded, stepped out from the back. He didn't interrupt, just watched. Kells kept going. "Nothing to say? Come on, you were doing so well with the quiet, mysterious act. Tell us about your unit. I'm sure it has a cool motto, something dramatic in Latin." Rain finally looked up, not at Kells, at the old sergeant behind her. Their eyes met. And for the first time, someone saw it, not the uniform, not the gear, not even the badge. He saw the bearing. The stillness that only came from walking away from wreckage. The way her shoulders didn't sag under pressure but settled. The way her eyes weren't defiant, just patient. Sergeant Edgerton narrowed his gaze, then took a step forward, slowly. Lieutenant Kells kept talking, unaware. "You don't belong here. That's the problem with people like you. You're trying to wear a story that isn't yours." Then a voice, quiet, rough, and from behind her. "Ma'am, you might want to stop." Kells turned. "Excuse me?" Edgerton nodded at the badge. "That emblem's not surplus. I've seen it before. Once, long time ago, and I was told never to speak of it again." The laughter stopped. So did Kells. He looked at Rain again. Something in his jaw tightened. He didn't salute. He didn't bow. But he did lower his voice. "I think we owe her more than jokes." At that table, surrounded by noise, mockery, and misjudgment, Rain Whitlock had done what she always did. She stood her ground, without explaining, without defending. Because those who've been through fire don't need to convince anyone they've burned. She hadn't moved. Not since the first zipper was pulled. Not since the badge surfaced. Not since the laughter faltered. No defense. No reaction. Just a kind of stillness that felt deliberate. While the guards kept busy poking through the rest of her gear and folding items, checking compartments, Rain Whitlock stood exactly as she had from the beginning. Steady, watchful. She noticed everything. Without appearing to. The hallway behind the processing desk curved into an unmonitored service bay. 2 exits, one unsecured. A cracked tile near the table edge offered better footing if things turned physical. The surveillance dome above her flickered once every 10 seconds to but enough. None of this changed her posture. She wasn't preparing to run. She was just aware as she had been trained to be. Across from her, Sergeant Tom Edgerton leaned against a metal frame, eyes narrowed, arms crossed loosely at his chest. He had seen postures like that before, mostly from people who'd come back from things that never made the news. Not aggressive, not nervous, just measured. Every part of her stance told him what the uniform didn't. Meanwhile, one of the younger guards pressed a hand along the bottom panel of her backpack and frowned. "This section feels double-layered," he said, more to himself than anyone else. He reached for a multi-tool and carefully slid a blade into the seam slow, controlled. There was no tear, only separation, as if the fabric had been designed to part. Inside, tucked behind reinforced stitching, he pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle, folded with purpose. When he unwrapped it, the room seemed to pause. The object wasn't large. No markings, no rank, no serial number, just shape, texture, weight. A triangular emblem, matte black. Through its center ran a broken wing split unevenly, as if sheared in flight. Beneath that, a half-burned arc curved upward like a scorched moon, caught mid-rise. No one spoke. To most of them, it meant nothing. Just another patch, another story, maybe something homemade. But not to Edgerton. He had seen that symbol once before, locked inside a briefing folder, stamped 3 layers above his pay grade. The file had been hand-delivered. Inside, 2 pages of heavily redacted field notes, 1 photo of a dead zone and a warning. No further inquiry, no duplicate records. He hadn't forgotten it. He simply hadn't dared speak of it. Until now. The guard who had uncovered the emblem looked confused. "Should I log this?" Edgerton didn't answer. He stepped forward slowly. Not urgently, not theatrically. Just enough to close the space between what they didn't know and what they were about to realize. Rain hadn't reacted to the discovery. She hadn't flinched when the inner pocket was opened. Hadn't shifted her weight or broken eye contact. She didn't need to say anything, because whatever needed to be known was already sitting there on the table. It wasn't a souvenir. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a fragment of a truth no one had permission to carry. And suddenly, no one in the room dared to make another joke. What stood before them wasn't someone pretending. It wasn't performance. It was presential, earned, and undeniable. You didn't carry something like that unless it had once saved your life. Or cost you everything. No one reached for the badge. It sat between them like a fuse that hadn't been lit yet, but everyone could feel the heat rising off it. The young guards had fallen quiet, retreating behind weak coughs and downward glances. Even Lieutenant Kells, who just minutes earlier had launched into a tirade of cheap insults, now stood stiff, unsure of what to say or how to say it. All of it, the mockery, the amusement, the assumption had evaporated. And still, Rain Whitlock said nothing. Until she did. She turned toward the only person in the room who hadn't fumbled, hadn't cracked a nervous joke, hadn't tried to posture. Sergeant Edgerton. Her voice was low, clear, even. Not a confession, just correction. Rain Whitlock. Technical lead, Ghost Company 7. Call sign, Red 9. The weight of it settled slowly. It wasn't volume that gave the words their impact. It was how plainly they were delivered, like facts read from a sealed report. Edgerton didn't blink. He simply gave a small nod, like he already knew. Or had suspected. One of the guards near the back frowned. "Ghost Company, what branch is that? Air Force? Navy?" Kells turned, her face pale now. "No, that was the group from..." She stopped herself. Too late. Rain looked at her without anger. No resentment. Only that same unflinching quiet that made people doubt what they thought they knew. She stepped 1 pace closer to the table, then spoke again. "Operation Ashfall. 2008. Uplink recovery, Cinderline Strip. Crimson Dune. Northern Corridor breach. Echo Drift. Civilian extraction under off-grid hostiles, Western Pakistan." The names meant nothing to most of them. But to those who had been around long enough, those who had seen rumor threads disappear and briefings blacked out mid-sentence, they weren't random. They were ghosts. Each of those missions had officially never happened. No after-action reports, no casualty lists, no acknowledgement, just silence. The room shifted again, This time not in noise, but in posture. Edgerton turned toward the command desk. Get internal verification online. Secure channel, now. The officer behind the desk hesitated. Sir, we need regional clearance for, then escalated. His tone wasn't loud, but it was final. Phones came out, lines lit up, 2 guards scrambled into the back office. One of the lieutenants tried to whisper something into her radio, but her hands were shaking. The young corporal who had joked about her gear earlier was now standing behind the others, half shielded by a filing cabinet. Like proximity itself might carry consequences. In the middle of it all, Rain remained unmoved. She didn't gloat, didn't explain, didn't reassert what she'd already made clear. Because people like her don't need to say things twice. Every movement in the room now bent around her, not out of force, but recognition. And fear. Not fear of violence, fear of realization. That they had touched something sacred and didn't even know it. The phone behind the desk rang, a red light blinking on a secure line. The staff sergeant picked it up, listened, said nothing for nearly a minute. When he hung up, his face was 2 shades paler than it had been. He looked directly at Rain. His words came slowly, measured. Credentials confirmed. Call sign Red 9 verified through Level 9 authorization. You're cleared for immediate release. No further inspection. Then, more quietly, Ma'am, I'm sorry, we didn't know. Rain didn't respond right away. She glanced down at the badge still lying on the table. Then reached for it, not like someone reclaiming a trophy, but like a mechanic retrieving a tool that never should have left her hand. She tucked it back into the cloth, folded it once, then once more. Returned it to the seam in her pack just as hidden as before. She slung the pack over her shoulder. The motion was fluid, practiced, entirely unremarkable, until you realized how many times it had probably been done under fire. Her eyes scanned the room once. Some looked away, others couldn't stop staring. She didn't offer a lesson. Didn't give a speech. Only left them with the truth, finally spoken. You weren't supposed to know. And then she walked calm, deliberate past the checkpoint that had mocked her, challenged her, doubted her, until it learned better. The secure line rang just once before it was answered. No introduction, no delay. Only a voice, calm and low, receiving. The desk sergeant cleared his throat, suddenly formal. This is Fort Grayline checkpoint. Requesting verification on Ghost Coast 7, call sign Red 9. Identification submitted verbally, badge confirmed physically, awaiting instruction. There was a pause, longer than it should have been. The line hissed faintly. Then the voice returned, measured, deliberate, and without hesitation. Stand by. That was all. Inside the room, the atmosphere turned clinical. No one laughed. No one even breathed too loudly. Radios were switched off. A few of the junior staff slipped into the hallway, suddenly needing to be elsewhere. Rain remained exactly where she'd been, all along, arms at her side, expression unreadable. She watched the door, the corners, the edges of the room like someone used to doing more with less. Across from her, Lieutenant Kells stood frozen. The color in her face had drained to the point her freckles looked like bruises. Her earlier mock-wreath tone, the sarcasm, the smug certainties, had evaporated into a single wide-eyed silence. She couldn't look Rain in the face. But Rain didn't seem to expect her to. Near the back wall, Sergeant Edgerton waited without speaking. His arms were still crossed, but now it looked less like skepticism and more like respect. The phone buzzed again, red light blinking. The desk sergeant answered on the first ring. He didn't say anything for a full 30 seconds, just listened. His jaw clenched, his shoulders pulled back. Then he nodded once, sharply though the person on the line couldn't see it. When he hung up, his voice was tight. Professional. Authorization confirmed. Level 9 clearance. Subject identified. Rain Whitlock, Technical Lead, Ghost Company 7. Status. Honorably discharged under special directive. He glanced down at the note he'd scribbled mid-call, then added, more carefully, Directive attached. Do not detain. Do not log. Do not document. Allow immediate passage. No record retention. The words landed like a dropped weapon. Heavy. Final. A ripple passed through the room. Not noise, but understanding. They hadn't just insulted someone important, They'd stumbled into a chapter that had been burned out of history, and she had walked straight through their checkpoint without blinking. The silence turned emotional. Kells took a half step back, then stopped herself. Her lower lip trembled. She swallowed hard. Whatever pride she'd entered the room with had fallen apart under the weight of something she hadn't been trained for. Being wrong, in front of someone who had earned the right to be invisible. She tried to speak. I didn't know. Rain didn't answer. She didn't nod, didn't offer grace. Not from cruelty, but because there was nothing left to explain. A few feet away, one of the younger guards who'd laughed first, loudest, was now hunched over a monitor, staring blankly at the screensaver. His ears were red. His hands weren't steady. Edgerton finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I heard stories. Ghost Company. Cinderline. But they said it was just black site fiction. You know, legend stuff. Now I'm standing here wondering how much else we've erased. No one answered him. Because in that moment, they all realized the same thing. It wasn't that Rain had come back. It was that she'd never truly left. She just kept moving like soldiers do when they've buried more than names. The badge now rested inside her pack again, stitched into the lining, just like before. She reached down, zipped it closed, pulled the straps, shouldered the weight like it meant nothing, though everyone now knew it meant everything. As she turned to leave, the checkpoint parted around her. No orders were issued. People just stepped aside. No one saluted. But every movement had softened, slowed. And then, just before she crossed the threshold, Edgerton said one more thing. He didn't call after her, didn't make a show of it. He just said it to himself, barely audible. But someone heard. They thought she was a myth. I knew better. And then Rain Whitlock walked through the last door without needing permission. The scanners didn't beep. The lights didn't flicker. But something had changed. Not the record. That would stay blank. Not the report. There wouldn't be one. But them, the ones who watched her go, they would remember. And that was the part no one could redact. The zipper closed with a final, deliberate sound. Rain's fingers lingered just long enough to secure the line of stitching, then folded the flap back over her shoulder strap. The backpack wasn't fancy, just sun-faded canvas with fraying edges and hand-reinforced seams, but it carried the weight of years, of places nobody spoke about. The broken wing badge, now uncovered and sitting atop the pack, gleamed under the overhead lights. Not polished, not ceremonial, just real, like it had seen more than it ever wanted to. She didn't hide it this time. Didn't tuck it back beneath the lining or slide it between layers of duct tape and silence. She left it right where it belonged. Visible, and as she adjusted the strap across her shoulder, the motion was smooth, exact, performed with the muscle memory of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before, under fire, in heat, in blackout conditions. That one movement said more than any nameplate ever could. She wasn't a civilian. She'd never been one. She had just learned to walk like one when the mission changed. The checkpoint didn't need to be told what to do. It moved. Not through command, through instinct. People stepped astronaut out of fear, but reverence. Even those who didn't fully understand the badge understood her. Not by rank, or file, or code, but by presence, by steadiness. No one said, "Make way." But a path cleared anyway, and she walked it like a soldier returning from war she never acknowledged being in. Her boots touched tile like they remembered desert clay. Her silhouette stretched down the corridor like a shadow from a different time. And just as she reached the outer threshold, just before the doors opened to whatever came next, a voice behind her spoke. Quiet, shaky, human. I didn't know. It was Lieutenant Kells. She didn't shout it, didn't cry. She just stood near the edge of the hall, hands still at her sides, guilt threading through every word like wire. Rain paused, didn't turn. Her reply came the same way everything else had, with clarity, without drama. You weren't supposed to. Nothing more. Nothing less. Then she stepped out, into morning. The checkpoint didn't breathe until long after she was gone. Even then, no one quite went back to normal. They couldn't. Not after watching someone carry truth without the need to prove it. Not after realizing they tried to reduce a legacy to paperwork and protocol. No report would be filed. No name would be entered. But those who saw her exit would remember it until the end of their shift, and far beyond. Because once you witness someone walk away without needing recognition, you start asking questions about everyone else you've underestimated. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything. By sundown, word had already traveled past Greyline's fences. It moved fast first between the guards who'd stood frozen as Rain Whitlock passed through, then to shift leaders, then to officers at other outposts who knew to read between the lines when certain calls came down. Nobody used her full name. Most didn't even know it. But they all repeated the same sentence. She walked through without raising her voice. And the room forgot how to speak. It wasn't just a rumor anymore. It was a shift. Lieutenant Kell, still shaken, still quiet, submitted a formal memo to her commanding officer. She didn't request transfer, didn't resign. She simply wrote, "We failed to see her because we weren't trained to see what service looks like when it's no longer wearing a uniform." Within days, 3 other border checkpoints revised their internal inspection protocols. No official statement, no broadcast. Just a soft directive from above: review silent travelers with the same respect you'd give a decorated officer. Some ignored it. Most didn't. A week later, a small wooden plaque appeared near the security table at Greyline. No announcement. No ceremony. Just a dark walnut square, mounted low, easy to miss unless you were paying attention. The carving was simple, hand-etched, almost rustic. Some badges are earned in blood and silence. Ghostco 7 passed here. Nobody claimed responsibility for placing it. The supervisors didn't remove it. And travelers who paused long enough to read it often glanced up at the ceiling afterward, like they were suddenly unsure whether the cameras above them were really for observation or for remembrance. Rain Whitlock was gone. No forwarding address. No digital trail. No mention in the logs. Just like she wanted. But something about her exit stuck. It changed the posture of guards who once thrived on control. It taught younger officers that quiet didn't mean powerless. It reminded older veterans of a truth they'd forgotten. Not every warrior wants to be known. But when one is, the weight of that revelation reorders everything around it. Over time, the story wore Petta's stories do. Some said she was ghost lead. Others claimed she disappeared after Helmand. A few whispered that she was the last one left from a team that never existed in official records. None of them were entirely wrong. None of them were entirely right. But that's what makes legends work. No matter how the tale was told by guards in break rooms, by officers at briefings, by travelers who thought they'd seen a ghost in combat boots, it always came back to one moment. A woman stepped forward when called. She said almost nothing. And still she changed everything. Because in the end, Rain never asked for acknowledgement. She didn't demand apologies. She didn't chase restoration. She just carried who she was quietly until the moment silence was no longer an option. And for once, the world listened. She didn't return to claim honor. She just passed through once. But that was enough for everyone to see who she really was. If stories like this move you, if you believe quiet strength still matters, subscribe to Grey Stories. These aren't just tales, they're reminders that honor never fades.